The morning sun cast long shadows across the peaceful valley as Thunder grazed alongside his herd near the rushing waters of Willow Creek. The magnificent Mustang stallion, his coat the color of storm clouds with a distinctive white blaze down his face, lifted his head at the sound of distant voices carried on the wind. His ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Something was wrong. Below in the valley, smoke began to rise from the cluster of teepees and wooden structures that made up the small village. Thunder had seen these people before. They lived quietly by the water, tending their horses and growing crops in the fertile bottomland. The stallion's instincts screamed danger as the acrid smell of burning canvas and wood reached him. Little Hawk was helping his grandmother gather medicinal herbs near the creek when the first gunshots cracked through the morning air. The 8-year-old boy dropped his collecting basket, his dark eyes wide with terror, as he saw masked riders thundering into the village, torches in their hands and guns blazing. These weren't soldiers. Their clothes were mismatched, their faces hidden behind bandanas. Raiders. "Grandmother!" Little Hawk cried, but the elderly woman was already pushing him toward the tall grass. "Run, child, to the rocks by the big pine!" she shouted over the growing chaos. "Hide until the sun sets, then follow the creek north to your grandfather's winter camp." Flames began licking at the nearest structures as the raiders rode through, their horses' hooves thundering against the packed earth. Little Hawk's legs pumped as he ran, his heart hammering in his chest. Behind him he could hear his grandmother's voice raised in prayer, then cut short by a gunshot that made his soul cry out in anguish. He stumbled, scraped his knee on a sharp stone, but kept running. The big pine tree was still so far away, and his small legs were already burning with exhaustion. A raider's horse rounded the bend behind him, its rider's eyes scanning the landscape like a hawk searching for prey. Thunder watched the scene unfold with growing agitation. His herd shifted nervously around him, sensing their leader's distress. The great stallion had survived 8 winters in these mountains by trusting his instincts, and every fiber of his being told him to flee with his mares and foals to the high country. But the small human running desperately through the grass below made him pause. The child stumbled again, this time falling hard against a boulder. Little Hawk's ankle twisted beneath him, sending sharp pain shooting up his leg. He tried to stand but collapsed, whimpering softly as he heard the raider's horse getting closer. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder, and he could hear the man's rough voice calling to his companions. "There's one over here. Little devil's trying to hide." Little Hawk closed his eyes, thinking of his grandmother's final words, of his grandfather waiting at the winter camp. He would never make it now. The sound of approaching hooves stopped just behind the boulder, where he lay hidden. Then, like an answer to his silent prayer, different hoofbeats approached, lighter, faster, and somehow more purposeful. Little Hawk opened his eyes to see the most magnificent horse he had ever witnessed standing between him and the raider. Thunder's head was raised high, his ears pinned back aggressively as he faced down the mounted man. The raider's horse shied away from the wild stallion, nearly unseating its rider. "What in the hell?" the man cursed, fighting to control his mount. Thunder stepped closer to Little Hawk, his intelligent brown eyes meeting the boy's for a brief moment. Something passed between them, an understanding older than words. The stallion lowered his great head, and without fully understanding why, Little Hawk reached up and grasped the thick mane. With surprising gentleness for such a powerful creature, Thunder helped the injured boy climb onto his back. Little Hawk had ridden horses before, but never bareback, never one so tall and strong. He wrapped his small arms around the stallion's neck, feeling the tremendous muscles bunched and ready beneath the silky coat. The raider finally got his horse under control and raised his rifle, but Thunder was already in motion. The Mustang spun on his hindquarters and launched into a gallop that left the earth behind. Little Hawk held on with every ounce of strength he possessed as they raced across the valley floor, the wind whipping his long black hair behind him like a banner. Behind them, the raider fired twice, but his shots went wide. Thunder's hooves thundered against the ground as he carried his precious burden away from the burning village and toward the safety of the high country. The stallion's herd followed, their own hoofbeats joining the symphony of escape. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Little Hawk looked back once to see his home consumed by flames and smoke. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but he pressed his face against Thunder's warm neck and held on. The great Mustang seemed to understand his grief, his gait smoothing into a steady, comforting rhythm that carried them both toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Thunder carried Little Hawk through narrow mountain passes where the air grew thin and crisp, far from the smoke and terror of the burning village below. The stallion's sure-footed gait never faltered as he navigated rocky ledges and steep trails that would have challenged even the most experienced mountain horses. His herd followed in single file, their trust in their leader absolute. Little Hawk's arms ached from holding on, and his twisted ankle throbbed with each step, but he didn't complain. The rhythmic movement of Thunder's powerful shoulders beneath him was oddly comforting, like being rocked by a gentle giant. The boy's tears had dried, leaving salt tracks on his dusty cheeks, but the image of his grandmother's final moments haunted him with every breath. As the sun reached its peak, Thunder began to slow his pace. They had climbed high into a region where pine trees gave way to scattered junipers and exposed granite faces. The stallion turned into what appeared to be a solid wall of rock, but as they drew closer, Little Hawk could see it was actually a cleverly concealed canyon entrance, hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines and fallen boulders. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for Thunder's broad shoulders, but it opened into a hidden valley that took Little Hawk's breath away. Steep canyon walls rose on all sides, creating a natural fortress. A crystal-clear spring bubbled up from the canyon floor, feeding a small pond before disappearing into an underground stream. Sweet grass covered the valley bottom, and ancient petroglyphs decorated the smooth rock faces, evidence that others had found sanctuary here long ago. Thunder's herd spread out to graze and drink, finally able to relax in their secret refuge. The great stallion carefully lowered himself to his knees, allowing Little Hawk to slide down from his back. The boy's legs buckled immediately, his injured ankle unable to support his weight. Thunder nickered softly, a sound almost like concern, and gently nuzzled the boy's shoulder. Little Hawk reached up with trembling hands to stroke the stallion's velvet muzzle, marveling at the intelligence he saw in those dark eyes. "Thank you," Little Hawk whispered in his native tongue, then repeated it in the English his grandmother had taught him. "Thank you, Thunder." The name seemed to fit perfectly. The stallion's coat was the color of storm clouds, and his hoofbeats had sounded like thunder as they escaped the valley. Thunder seemed to approve of the name, tossing his magnificent head and whickering softly. Little Hawk tried to stand again, but pain shot through his ankle like lightning. He examined the injury carefully, the way his grandmother had taught him. The ankle was swollen but not broken, twisted badly, but it would heal with rest. More concerning was the deep scrape on his knee, still bleeding slowly and already showing signs of dirt and debris. Thunder watched the boy's examination with evident concern. When Little Hawk crawled toward the spring to clean his wounds, the stallion followed, his hooves careful not to disturb the boy's slow progress. The cold mountain water was shocking against Little Hawk's injuries, but it washed away the blood and grime from his desperate flight. As the afternoon wore on, Little Hawk found himself growing weak from shock and blood loss. His stomach cramped with hunger. He hadn't eaten since sunrise, before the world turned upside down. Thunder seemed to sense his distress and began moving around the canyon with purpose, occasionally lowering his head to crop certain plants. The stallion approached Little Hawk, carrying a mouthful of tender grass shoots, and dropped them gently beside the boy. Little Hawk recognized them as spring onions, edible and nutritious. Thunder returned several more times with different offerings: wild mint, pine nuts that had fallen from trees higher up the canyon walls, and even some early berries from a hidden bush. "You're taking care of me," Little Hawk said wonderingly, accepting the food gratefully. The pine nuts were rich and filling, and the mint helped settle his nervous stomach. just like grandmother took care of me. And as evening approached, the temperature in the high country began to drop significantly. Little Hawk's thin clothing offered little protection against the mountain cold, and he began to shiver uncontrollably. Thunder observed this new distress, and after a moment's hesitation, approached the boy again. The great stallion carefully lowered himself to the ground beside Little Hawk, positioning his body to block the cold wind that whistled through the canyon entrance. His thick winter coat radiated warmth, and Little Hawk instinctively curled up against the horse's side, feeling the steady rhythm of Thunder's breathing and the powerful beat of his heart. Other members of the herd gathered around them in a protective circle, mares with their foals, yearlings, and an old grey gelding who seemed to be Thunder's trusted lieutenant. Their combined body heat created a warm pocket in the cold mountain air, and Little Hawk felt safer than he had since the morning's terror began. As stars appeared overhead in the crystal-clear mountain sky, Little Hawk fought against sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flames and heard his grandmother's voice calling his name. But Thunder's presence was a steady comfort, and gradually exhaustion overcame fear. "I don't know where to go," Little Hawk whispered into Thunder's mane. "Grandfather's winter camp is so far, and my ankle, I can't walk that far." Thunder's only response was a gentle rumble deep in his chest, almost like a cat's purr. The sound vibrated through Little Hawk's body, somehow conveying safety and protection without words. The boy finally surrendered to sleep, his small hand still tangled in Thunder's mane. Around them, the herd kept silent watch through the night, their ears constantly moving to catch any sound of danger. Thunder remained motionless, except for the rise and fall of his breathing, a living guardian protecting the broken child who had somehow claimed his fierce heart. In his dreams, Little Hawk rode across endless prairies on Thunder's back, the wind singing songs of freedom and hope. But even in sleep, a part of him knew that when morning came, they would have to face the harsh realities of survival and the dangerous journey that lay ahead. 3 days had passed in the hidden canyon, and Little Hawk's condition was worsening. Despite Thunder's careful tending, the boy's injured knee had become infected, red streaks spreading up his leg like angry fingers. His ankle, though less swollen, still couldn't bear his weight. Fever came and went in waves, leaving him shivering one moment and burning the next. Thunder paced the canyon floor restlessly, his keen intelligence recognizing that the healing herbs and clean water weren't enough. The boy needed help that only humans could provide. The stallion had survived these mountains by avoiding contact with the two-legged creatures, but now his protective instincts warred with his natural caution. On the morning of the 4th day, Little Hawk could barely lift his head when Thunder approached with fresh water in a crude bark container he had somehow fashioned. The boy's skin was pale beneath its natural bronze tone, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. "Thunder," Little Hawk whispered, his voice barely audible. I think grandmother is calling me." The stallion's nostrils flared, and he nudged the boy gently with his muzzle. Something in Thunder's deep brown eyes seemed to make a decision, a resolve that transcended his wild nature. He moved to the canyon entrance and released a trumpeting call that echoed off the rock walls, summoning his herd. The mares and foals gathered around their leader, sensing the gravity of the moment. Thunder nuzzled each of them in turn, a farewell that spoke of duty and sacrifice. The old grey gelding stepped forward, touching his nose to Thunder's neck in what could only be described as a blessing. Thunder returned to Little Hawk and carefully helped the delirious boy onto his back. This time, the stallion's movements were different, purposeful and determined. He was no longer seeking safety in the high country. He was venturing into the dangerous territory below, where men with guns and ropes waited to capture wild horses. The descent from the hidden canyon was treacherous. Thunder picked his way down steep, rocky trails that would have challenged a mountain goat. Little Hawk, barely conscious, clung to the stallion's mane with instinctive desperation. Several times, loose rocks shifted under Thunder's hooves, sending small avalanches tumbling into the valleys below. As they descended, the landscape gradually changed. Pine forests gave way to scrub oak and grassland. The air grew warmer and carried different scents: wood smoke, cultivated crops, and the distinctive smell of human habitation. Thunder's ears swiveled constantly, alert for any sign of danger. By midday, they had reached the rolling hills that bordered the Montana Territory settlements. In the distance, Thunder could see thin columns of smoke rising from chimneys and the geometric patterns of fenced fields. His every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but the weight of the sick child on his back drove him forward. Little Hawk stirred briefly as they crested a hill, his fever-bright eyes taking in the foreign landscape below. "Where are we?" he mumbled in confusion. Thunder's only answer was a soft whicker of encouragement as he began the final descent toward civilization. The first human to spot them was 12-year-old Mary Bradley, hanging laundry behind her family's small farmhouse. She dropped her basket of wet clothes and stared in amazement at the magnificent wild stallion, carrying what appeared to be an injured Indian boy. Her scream brought her older brother Tom running from the barn, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he always carried. But something in the scene stopped Tom from reaching for his weapon. The great horse stood perfectly still about 50 yards away, making no aggressive moves despite his obvious wariness. The boy on his back was clearly in distress, slumped forward against the stallion's neck. "Mary, go get Dr. Mitchell," Tom said quietly, never taking his eyes off Thunder. "Tell her to bring her medical bag." Thunder watched the girl run toward the cluster of buildings that made up the small settlement of Willow Creek, named for the very stream that had run through Little Hawk's destroyed village. The stallion's muscles were coiled like springs, ready to bolt at the first sign of threat, but something about the young man's calm demeanor kept him rooted in place. Tom began walking slowly toward them, his hands visible and empty. "Easy, boy," he murmured, using the same tone he would with a spooked horse. "I can see you're trying to help him. We want to help too." Thunder's ears flicked forward and back, processing this new human scent and posture. Tom moved like someone comfortable around horses, with none of the jerky movements or predatory stance that Thunder associated with danger. When the young man stopped 10 feet away and slowly crouched down, making himself less threatening, Thunder made another decision that went against every survival instinct he possessed. The stallion took 3 careful steps forward. "That's it," Tom whispered, his heart hammering with excitement and fear. He had never been this close to a wild Mustang, and certainly never one of this caliber. Thunder was magnificent, easily 16 hands high, with the powerful build and intelligent eyes of a horse born to lead. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived at a run, her medical bag clutched in one hand and her skirts hiked up with the other. She was a woman in her 30s, weathered by frontier life, but with kind eyes and capable hands. She had seen plenty of injured children in her years practicing medicine, but never one delivered by a wild horse. "Dear God," she breathed, taking in Little Hawk's condition at a glance. The infection was obvious even from a distance, and the boy's labored breathing spoke of systemic illness. "Tom, we need to get him down carefully. Can you—" Thunder solved the problem himself. With the same gentle care he had shown in the canyon, the stallion lowered himself to his knees, allowing Tom and Dr. Mitchell to carefully lift Little Hawk from his back. The boy was burning with fever, muttering words in a language neither of them understood. As they carried Little Hawk toward the doctor's clinic, Thunder rose and followed at a distance, his protective instincts overriding his fear of humans. Dr. Mitchell glanced back at the stallion and shook her head in wonder. "In 30 years of frontier medicine, I've never seen anything like this," she said to Tom. "That horse saved this boy's life, and now he won't leave his side." Thunder stopped at the edge of the settlement, unwilling to venture closer to the buildings and crowds of humans, but his eyes never left the clinic where they had taken Little Hawk. The stallion had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, entering the world of men for the sake of a small boy who had somehow claimed his fierce heart. As evening fell, Thunder remained at his post, a wild guardian keeping watch over his human friend, prepared to face whatever dangers civilization might bring. For 2 days, Little Hawk drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams, while Dr. Sarah Mitchell fought to save his life. The infection in his knee had spread dangerously, requiring careful cleaning and the precious antibiotics she kept for the most serious cases. Thunder never left his vigil at the edge of town, standing like a statue throughout the scorching days and cold nights, his eyes fixed on the clinic's windows. The townspeople of Willow Creek had mixed reactions to the magnificent stallion's presence. Some wanted to capture him. A horse of Thunder's quality would be worth a fortune broken to saddle. Others feared he might be dangerous, a wild animal that could hurt their children. But Tom Bradley, who had witnessed Thunder's gentle care of Little Hawk, appointed himself the stallion's protector. "Anyone who tries to rope that horse will answer to me," Tom declared to the group of would-be horse catchers gathered outside the saloon. "That animal saved a child's life. He deserves our respect, not our greed." Dr. Mitchell emerged from her clinic on the 3rd morning, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. She had worked through the night, and for the first time since Thunder's arrival, she had good news. The boy's fever had broken, and his knee was responding to treatment. Thunder's ears pricked forward as she approached, and for a moment, woman and stallion regarded each other with mutual respect. Dr. Mitchell had grown up on a ranch before studying medicine back east, and she recognized the intelligence in Thunder's eyes. "He's going to be all right," she said quietly, not knowing if the horse could understand her words, but hoping he might grasp her tone. "Your friend is going to live." Thunder's response was a soft whicker that sounded almost like relief. He pawed the ground once, then settled back into his patient watching. Inside the clinic, Little Hawk opened his eyes for the first time in days to find himself in a strange room with white walls and unfamiliar smells. Panic seized him until he saw Thunder's familiar silhouette through the window, and he relaxed with a shuddering sigh. "You're safe," came a gentle voice, and Little Hawk turned to see Dr. Mitchell approaching with a cup of broth. "You've been very sick, but you're getting better now." Little Hawk tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing knee. "Thunder," he whispered, his voice hoarse from fever. "Is Thunder—" "Your horse friend is fine," Dr. Mitchell assured him, helping him sip the warm broth. "He's been waiting for you to wake up. He hasn't left that spot in 3 days." "He's not my horse," Little Hawk said weakly. "He's wild. He chose to save me." Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. The boy's English was excellent, with only a slight accent. "What's your name, child?" "Little Hawk," he replied, then added more formally, "I am Little Hawk, grandson of Chief Standing Bear of the Mountain Crow people." The doctor's expression grew grave. She had heard rumors about the attack on the village by the creek, but few details had reached their small settlement. "What happened to your village, Little Hawk? Can you tell me?" The boy's eyes filled with tears as he recounted the attack, his grandmother's sacrifice, and Thunder's miraculous rescue. Dr. Mitchell listened with growing horror and anger. She had seen the aftermath of such raids before. They were becoming all too common as tensions grew between different groups competing for the same land. "I need to find my grandfather," Little Hawk said, struggling again to sit up. "He's at the winter camp in the northern mountains. He'll be worried." "You're not going anywhere for at least a week," Dr. Mitchell said firmly. "That infection nearly killed you. Your grandfather will have to wait until you're strong enough to travel." Over the following days, a routine developed. Little Hawk would sit by the clinic window, talking quietly to Thunder through the glass. The stallion would respond with gentle nickers and head movements, maintaining their connection despite the barrier between them. Tom Bradley began bringing fresh grass and water for Thunder, earning the horse's cautious acceptance. The breakthrough came on Little Hawk's 5th day of recovery. Dr. Mitchell had helped him outside to sit in the sunshine, and Thunder approached closer than he had since their arrival. The stallion extended his neck, allowing Little Hawk to stroke his muzzle with trembling hands. "He saved my life," Little Hawk said to Dr. Mitchell and Tom, who watched the reunion with amazement. In my grandmother's stories, horses were sacred beings who could see into human hearts. Thunder saw that I needed help, and he chose to give up his freedom to save me. Maybe he didn't give up his freedom, Dr. Mitchell suggested thoughtfully. Maybe he found something more valuable. As Little Hawk grew stronger, he began helping around the clinic, translating for Dr. Mitchell when other tribal members came seeking medical care. His presence helped bridge the gap between the settlement and the various groups who lived in the surrounding territory. Tom Bradley taught him about ranch work and farming, while Little Hawk shared his knowledge of the mountains and wildlife. But the peaceful interlude couldn't last forever. On a hot afternoon in mid-July, a dust cloud on the horizon announced the arrival of strangers. Tom grabbed his rifle, recognizing the hard-riding approach of men with violent intentions. "Dr. Mitchell," he called, "we've got trouble coming." The riders were the same raiders who had attacked Little Hawk's village, following rumors of the boy's survival. Their leader, a scarred man named Jake Morrison, had been hired by land speculators who wanted to clear the territory of any potential claimants. A survivor could identify them and bring unwanted attention from the authorities. Thunder sensed the danger before anyone else, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of the horses that had been present during the attack. He trumpeted a warning call that echoed across the valley, his powerful voice carrying notes of challenge and defiance. Little Hawk appeared in the clinic doorway, his face pale but determined. "They've come for me," he said simply. "The men who killed my grandmother." Dr. Mitchell stepped protectively in front of the boy. "They'll have to go through me first." Tom Bradley checked his rifle and took position behind a water trough. "And me." But it was Thunder who made the first move. The great stallion reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves striking the air like weapons. His call was answered from the hills above. His herd had followed him down from the high country and now appeared on the ridgeline, 20 horses strong, their eyes fixed on their leader. The raiders pulled up short, suddenly finding themselves facing not just a few townspeople, but a wild stallion who had claimed this place as his territory to defend. Thunder's message was clear. Anyone who threatened Little Hawk would have to face him first. Jake Morrison spat into the dust and raised his rifle. "Just a horse," he sneered. "Won't be the first one I've shot." But as he took aim, Thunder's intelligence showed itself once again. The stallion didn't charge blindly into the gunfire. Instead, he began moving in a wide circle, his herd following his lead, creating a living wall of horseflesh between the raiders and the town. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Little Hawk knew that Thunder was prepared to sacrifice everything, including his wild freedom, to protect the boy who had somehow become his family. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, with Thunder's herd circling the settlement like a living fortress. Jake Morrison's raiders found themselves trapped between the buildings and 20 wild horses whose eyes burned with protective fury. The stallion's tactical brilliance had turned their ambush into a siege where they were the ones surrounded. "You're making a mistake, horse," Morrison snarled, his rifle trained on Thunder's magnificent head. "I've got 6 men and enough bullets to drop every one of you animals." Thunder's response was to step closer, his hooves striking sparks from the rocky ground. Behind him, Little Hawk emerged from the clinic despite Dr. Mitchell's protests, his young face set with determination that belied his years. "You killed my grandmother," Little Hawk called out, his voice carrying across the dusty street. "You burned our village and murdered innocent people for money. But you failed to kill me, and now everyone will know what you did." Morrison's scarred face twisted with rage. "Should have stayed dead, boy. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." The raider raised his rifle, but Tom Bradley's shot rang out first, shattering Morrison's gun barrel and sending the man tumbling from his horse. The other raiders wheeled their mounts, suddenly finding themselves facing not just an angry stallion, but armed townspeople who had taken defensive positions throughout the settlement. Thunder seized the moment of confusion. With a trumpeting battle cry that echoed off the mountains, he charged directly at the nearest raider. The man's horse, terrified by the wild stallion's fury, bolted sideways and crashed into a watering trough, sending both horse and rider sprawling. The battle was brief but decisive. Thunder's herd moved with coordinated precision, their wild instincts perfectly suited for driving off predators. The raiders, expecting to face a handful of frightened settlers, found themselves overwhelmed by a force of nature they had never encountered. Within minutes, 3 of them were unhorsed, 2 more had fled, and Morrison himself was nursing a dislocated shoulder while staring down the barrel of Tom Bradley's rifle. "Tie them up," Dr. Mitchell ordered, her medical bag forgotten as she helped secure the prisoners. "We'll hold them for the territorial marshal." As the dust settled, Thunder approached Little Hawk with careful steps, his battle fury fading into gentle concern. The boy wrapped his arms around the stallion's powerful neck, feeling the rapid heartbeat that spoke of the danger they had just faced together. "You could have been killed," Little Hawk whispered into Thunder's mane. "You didn't have to fight for me." Thunder's soft wicker seemed to say that some things were worth fighting for. Over the following days, as they waited for the marshal to arrive, Little Hawk grew stronger and began making plans for the future. Dr. Mitchell had sent word to his grandfather through trading networks, and Chief Standing Bear's reply had been swift and grateful. He would come to collect his grandson as soon as the mountain passes were clear. But the question of what would happen to Thunder weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The stallion had saved Little Hawk's life and defended the settlement, but he was still a wild horse. Several wealthy ranchers had already made offers to buy him, and there was talk of attempting to capture the entire herd. "They don't understand," Little Hawk said to Dr. Mitchell as they watched Thunder grazing peacefully near the clinic. "Thunder isn't property to be owned. He's my friend who chose to help me. Taking his freedom would be like putting the wind in a cage." Dr. Mitchell had been thinking the same thing. "What will you do when your grandfather comes? Thunder won't be able to follow you into the mountains with winter coming." Little Hawk was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but I won't let anyone hurt him or capture him. He deserves to run free." The answer came from an unexpected source. Chief Standing Bear arrived 3 days later, not alone but with a small party of tribal elders and warriors. The old chief was a man of dignity and wisdom, his weathered face showing both grief for his losses and joy at his grandson's survival. The reunion between grandfather and grandson was emotional, but it was Standing Bear's reaction to Thunder that surprised everyone. The chief approached the stallion with the reverence of a man who understood the sacred nature of the bond between horse and boy. "This is the one who saved you," Standing Bear said in his native tongue, then repeated it in English for the benefit of Dr. Mitchell and Tom. "In our traditions, such a horse is touched by the spirits. He cannot be owned by any man." Thunder allowed the old chief to approach, sensing the wisdom and respect in the elder's manner. Standing Bear placed a gentle hand on the stallion's neck and spoke words in his native language, a blessing and a promise. "What did you say?" Dr. Mitchell asked. Standing Bear smiled. "I told him that he will always be welcome in our territory and that our people will watch over his herd. There are hidden valleys in our mountains where horses can winter safely, places where no white man's rope will ever reach." The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Thunder would remain free, but he would have a sanctuary where he and his herd could find safety and shelter. Little Hawk would return to his grandfather's people, but the bond between boy and stallion would endure. As the time came for departure, Little Hawk said his farewells to the people who had become like family to him. Dr. Mitchell gave him a small medicine pouch with herbs and bandages, while Tom Bradley pressed a carved wooden whistle into his hands. "For calling Thunder," Tom explained, "though I suspect he'll always know when you need him." The final goodbye was the hardest. Little Hawk stood before Thunder, his hands resting on the stallion's velvet muzzle, trying to find words for feelings too deep for language. "Thank you," he finally whispered, "for everything, for saving my life, for being my friend, for showing me that some bonds are stronger than fear or differences. Thunder's response was to gently touch his forehead to the boys, a gesture of affection and understanding that needed no translation. Chief Standing Bear and his grandson began their journey north, riding horses provided by the grateful townspeople. As they crested the first hill, Little Hawk looked back to see Thunder standing tall against the sunset, his herd gathered around him like a living embodiment of freedom itself. But the story didn't end there. Over the years that followed, travelers would speak of a magnificent stallion who appeared whenever people were in danger in the mountains. Some said he was just a legend, but others swore they had seen him, a horse with the color of storm clouds and the heart of a guardian angel. Little Hawk grew to manhood among his grandfather's people, eventually becoming a bridge between different communities, just as Thunder had been a bridge between the wild and the civilized. And sometimes, on clear mountain nights, when the wind carried the sound of distant hoofbeats, both boy and stallion would remember the bond that had saved them both and changed their lives forever. The wild Mustang had taught them all that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in conquering, but in choosing to care for those who cannot care for themselves. In a harsh land where survival often meant hardening one's heart, Thunder had shown them that compassion was not weakness. It was the greatest power of all. Years later, when Little Hawk had children of his own, he would tell them the story of Thunder, the brave Mustang who had spotted an orphaned child in a burning village and galloped to safety, carrying not just a boy, but the hope that different worlds could find common ground in the simple act of saving a life. And in the hidden valleys of the northern mountains, Thunder's descendants still run free, their hoofbeats echoing through the canyons like thunder, carrying the memory of a stallion who proved that true freedom comes not from avoiding responsibility, but from choosing to protect those we love.